So last week, the Yankees made a trade for Caleb Ferguson with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's a left-handed reliever, 27 years old, only has 1 year left of control, but has been brilliant in his major league career, especially over the last 2 seasons. And he has an exciting profile that will certainly catch the eyes of not just fans, but media alike. And I think there's a lot to love here. He is going to serve as the primary replacement for Wandy Peralta. I know they also brought in Victor Gonzalez, and Gonzalez definitely profiles a lot more like Peralta in the sinker slider kind of aspect. And Ferguson's a little bit different, but we'll get into kind of why it's important to have a guy with different looks, what he brings to the table, and everything regarding Caleb Ferguson and this trade. But before we get into everything, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. You guys can also follow us on various social media platforms. We've got an Instagram, we've got a TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and of course this YouTube page. And EmpireSportsMedia.com is where we have all of your favorite New York sports teams. We're doing written coverage on all of them, so make sure you guys check that out as well. And without further ado, let's get into today's video. Caleb Ferguson has been brilliant over the past 2 seasons with the Los Angeles Dodgers, pitching to a 2.84 ERA across 95 innings pitched, with a 26% strikeout rate, 46.8% ground ball rate, and 3.1% barrel rate. His ability to combine strikeouts with weak contact makes him an extremely enticing reliever for the Yankees, and from the left-handed side, you can expect a lot of velocity from the four-seam fastball and good movement profiles with all of his pitches. He releases from a lower slot, which means you're getting a lower release height, and that plays extremely well for a four-seam fastball. And in Caleb Ferguson's case, he has a really good four-seamer. He increased his velocity to 95.8 miles an hour, a career high in terms of average velocity, and he really improved upon his 2022 season, as while in 2022, he had a better ERA. In 2023, I think it was a much more sustainable version of himself, and I think the stuff profile got a lot better. Getting back to the four-seam fastball, he throws at 95.8 miles an hour with 14.9 inches of induced vertical break and 6.6 inches of arm side run. As mentioned earlier, he releases it from a lower release height, and so while 14.9 inches of induced vertical break is slightly below the major league average at around 16 inches for a four-seam fastball, his lower slot release allows it to stay on plane more, and it rides through the zone, generating a 26% whiff rate, a 27.8% chase rate, and a 346 expected weighted on base average on contact. Now, that's a big word, expected weighted on base average on contact, or you could say a big group of words, but basically what that stat does is it measures the damage contact allowed, with roughly 370 being around the league average, and being at 346 is certainly impressive because four-seamers get hit a lot harder than the league average pitch because fastballs are easier to hit than the average pitch. Think about success rates against breaking balls versus success rates against fastballs. There are more hitters in this league who can hit fastballs and can't handle breaking balls than the inverse because typically speaking, breaking balls and off-speed pitches generate softer contact and more swings and misses. When measuring his four-seam fastball, we can look at Stuff Plus to see how good it is relative to the league average pitch, and at a 108, it's 8 points better than the league average pitch, and four-seamers tend to sit around the 99 range in terms of Stuff Plus, so it's almost a standard deviation better than the average four-seamer, and that's really impressive considering that that's a pitch that at times has gotten away from him as he's dealt with injuries and lost some velocity. This past season was really encouraging for him, and I think the Yankees bought high because they knew that he could potentially take a step forward with more consistency on the mound and fewer questions about his durability. He relies on his fastball 66.5% of the time, so he's throwing it 2/3 of the time. He's got comfort throwing it to lefties, he's got comfort throwing it to righties, he's got good command of the pitch with a 102 location plus, and ultimately, he has a really strong four-seam fastball, and that helps establish his profile. What plays off his four-seamer really well is a cutter that has a very unique movement profile. It generates -1 inches of induced vertical break, and typically we see really good cutters have a lot of velocity and ride through the zone, but his cutter plays a lot more like a slider or a combination between a cutter and a slider. There's a huge vertical separation gap in the four-seamer and the cutter, and there isn't too wide of a horizontal movement gap, so there is a lot of vertical deception there. It makes him devastating against right-handed batters, and he still remains effective against lefties because the cutter has enough horizontal movement where left-handed batters are still going to swing over the top of it. With a 107 Stuff Plus, it is a standard deviation better than the average cutter because cutters tend to sit well below 100 in terms of stuff plus, and this is arguably his best pitch. It has a 27.1% whiff rate, a 31.3% chase rate, and just like his four-seam fastball, it has excellent damage prevention metrics, and that's really important for having a good secondary pitch that can get swings and misses, get batters to expand the zone, and when they do make contact, it's usually harmless contact. Now, as mentioned earlier, he had a 49.1% ground ball rate this past season and only a 3% barrel rate. So that indicates that when they do make contact, it usually results in harmless damage, and batters have had a hard time trying to get Caleb Ferguson to give up runs. Now, a pitch he is working on, and something he kind of broke out a little bit last year, was a sweeping slider. Now, sweepers are weird for lefties because sweepers tend to play better against same-handed hitters. And if we think about the makeup of hitters in this league, most of them are right-handed, so it's never been worthwhile to teach lefties the sweeper because oftentimes they aren't facing left-handed batters. There aren't many situations in which lefties are going to rely on that pitch heavily. But when you play it off of a four-seamer and a cutter, using it as a tertiary pitch could potentially allow for the New York Yankees to get him to get more left-handed batters out, number one, and number two, just have a pitch with a different look. If a right-handed batter is seeing a four-seamer and a cutter all the time, they might sit and adjust to it, but if they see a big sweeping slider going towards their back foot, they may have trouble reacting to the pitch, or if they see a sweeping slider going to the outside part of the plate, they also might react poorly to it and not swing. The Yankees are a great organization when it comes to developing sweepers, so if he were to try to lean on that pitch a little bit more, at least in left-handed situations, I think this is certainly the organization to do that with, but I don't expect that the Yankees try to make any massive changes to his profile. Caleb Ferguson came from the Dodgers organization, and if you guys aren't aware, the Los Angeles Dodgers might be the smartest team in baseball. They have excellent pitching development, excellent hitting development, a great analytics team. They're an extremely forward-thinking organization, and I believe that Caleb Ferguson has basically maxed out his profile. Could he have some better BABIP luck? He had a 364 BABIP allowed last year, and I just don't think that's very sustainable. Absolutely. But in terms of just natural skills, whether it's throwing harder, whether it's having a better pitch repertoire, I think he's kind of maxed everything out on that standpoint. But the Yankees are betting on the ability to get left-handed batters out. They're betting on an extremely stable pitcher who has some pretty good projections, which we'll talk about in a bit. And they also didn't have to pay a hefty price to get Ferguson. Ferguson will only be making $2.4 million in arbitration this season, and he's only a one-year rental. So the Yankees traded Christian Zuzweda, who's a Dominican Summer League pitcher, and a guy, Matt Gage, who they claimed off of waivers. So they didn't really have to trade much to get him, and I think that was part of the appeal here. They didn't want to commit multiple years to a reliever they didn't feel was worth it, and also, they're above $300 million for the first time in franchise history. This is the highest payroll the New York Yankees have ever run out in any iteration of the team, and I'm sure they're near a budget limit, and they aren't trying to commit multiple years to players, knowing that they develop relievers extremely well. Now, it does create an interesting question about their bullpen, because they have a myriad of guys who will hit free agency after this season. Clay Holmes, Jonathan Loaizaga, Tommy Canley, and now Caleb Ferguson, but that's a problem they'll address later on, and that's the situation that they'll have to look at on the position player side of things too. Juan Soto, Alex Verdugo, Gleyber Torres, and potentially even Anthony Rizzo, if they decline his option, could also all hit free agency. So these are the walk-year Yankees, and it'll be interesting to see how Caleb Ferguson plays in New York. But looking at projections, Zips is a little more bearish on his projections. They have him at a 3.99 ERA across 58 and a two-third innings pitched, which would still be strong production, but it is a little bit bearish compared to what the other projections say. Steamer is the most optimistic. They have him for a 3.34 ERA in terms of projections, and he has a 28% projected strikeout rate in that projection system. And for the bat, which is, a StatCast-based version of it, they have a 3.73 ERA, so a little bit closer to Zips, but it lands somewhere in the middle. Personally, I believe that we're going to see something in between the Steamer and Zips projections. I think we could see a repeat of last season where he had a 3.43 ERA. That was 20% better than the league average. And ultimately, I think this addition will certainly pay huge dividends for the Yankees. They've got an excellent scouting department when it comes to acquiring pitchers, and especially in their bullpen, they do a great job of finding relief talent. And I certainly believe Ferguson can provide big innings for the Yankees in 2024.